Most people think strength means cutting toxic people out of your life the moment they hurt you. But what if that is exactly the reaction they expect? What if your anger, your explanations, and your dramatic exit are the very things that keep you trapped in their game? True power is quieter than revenge. It is the ability to become so grounded, so disciplined, and so emotionally unavailable to manipulation that toxic people can no longer survive in your presence. They do not leave because you force them to. They leave because they can no longer control you. Today, I want to show you how that happens. The first mistake most people make when dealing with a toxic person is believing the problem is the other person's behavior alone. Of course, their words may be hurtful, their actions may be manipulative, and their intentions may not be pure. But if you look deeper, you will notice something that often goes unseen. Every toxic pattern survives because it continues to receive something it needs. Just as a fire cannot continue without fuel, manipulation cannot continue without your participation. This does not mean you are responsible for another person's choices. It means you are responsible for what you continue to give them. Think carefully about the last time someone provoked you. Perhaps they criticized you unfairly, ignored your boundaries, twisted your words, or made you feel guilty for protecting your own peace. What was your immediate response? Did you rush to explain yourself? Did you spend hours trying to prove your innocence? Did you replay the conversation in your mind, searching for the perfect answer you should have given? If so, then the conversation never truly ended. It continued inside your own mind, where your energy was still being consumed. Many toxic people understand something that most people never realize. They do not always seek agreement. They seek engagement. Whether you love them or hate them, whether you praise them or argue with them, your attention is still centered on them. As long as they can influence your emotions, they remain in control of a part of your inner world. This is why reacting emotionally often strengthens the very cycle you wish to escape. Every angry message, every desperate explanation, every attempt to expose them or convince them becomes another invitation to continue the game. They know exactly which words awaken your fear, your guilt, your need to be understood. And because they know this, they continue pressing those same buttons again and again. Now imagine someone standing before a locked door, knocking repeatedly. The first knock receives no answer. The second receives none. The third receives only silence. Eventually, the person realizes there is no point in standing there any longer. They walk away, not because the door fought back, but because nothing on the other side was available to control. Your mind can become that door. Silence is often misunderstood. People think silence means weakness, avoidance, or surrender. But there is a silence born from fear, and there is a silence born from mastery. One hides because it is afraid. The other remains still because it refuses to waste energy on battles that lead nowhere. There is an enormous difference. Observe your emotions before they become your actions. Notice how quickly the body wants to defend itself. The heart beats faster. The mind searches for arguments. The ego wants justice immediately. But if you pause even for a single breath, you interrupt the old pattern. You stop giving your emotions away to someone who has not earned them. This discipline is not easy. The ego wants the satisfaction of the final word. It wants recognition. It wants to feel victorious. Yet true victory is not speaking louder than another person. It is reaching a place where their words no longer determine your state of mind. When you can remain calm in the presence of chaos, you have already reclaimed something far more valuable than the argument itself. You have reclaimed yourself. From that moment, the balance begins to change. Once you begin reclaiming your emotional energy, something remarkable starts to happen. The person who once seemed to have unlimited influence over your thoughts begins to lose their grip. Not because they have changed, but because you have. This is where real strength begins, not in forcing another person to behave differently, but in becoming someone who can no longer be manipulated. Manipulation only works when it finds an opening. It looks for your fear of rejection, your desire to be liked, your discomfort with conflict, or your habit of putting everyone else's happiness before your own. These openings are rarely visible to us because they are hidden beneath good intentions. You tell yourself you are being kind. You believe you are keeping the peace. You think one more explanation will finally make them understand. Yet the more you surrender your inner stability to earn someone else's approval, the more dependent you become on their reaction. There comes a moment when you must ask yourself a difficult question. Why do I need someone who repeatedly disrespects me to understand my worth? If a person has consistently ignored your honesty, dismissed your feelings, or twisted your words, what makes you believe that the next conversation will suddenly transform them? Sometimes the search for understanding is simply another way of postponing acceptance. Emotional independence is not becoming cold or detached from humanity. It is learning that your peace cannot depend on another person's opinion of you. If someone praises you today and criticizes you tomorrow, neither should define who you are. When your identity rises and falls with other people's emotions, you have unknowingly handed them the keys to your inner world. Toxic individuals often rely on four powerful forces: fear, guilt, obligation, and confusion. They create fear by making you believe that everything will fall apart if you leave. They create guilt by convincing you that protecting yourself is selfish. They create obligation by reminding you of everything they have supposedly done for you. And they create confusion by constantly changing the story until you begin questioning your own memory and judgment. Once you recognize these patterns, they become far less effective. Light has a way of dissolving what once thrived in darkness. This is why you must slow down before responding. A reaction is immediate. It belongs to emotion. A response is deliberate. It belongs to awareness. Between what happens and how you respond, there is a small space. Most people overlook this space because they are eager to defend themselves. But within that brief pause lies your freedom. It is the place where wisdom can speak before the ego does. You do not have to answer every accusation. You do not have to defend every misunderstanding. You do not have to correct every false story someone tells about you. There is a quiet confidence that emerges when you realize your character is built through consistent actions, not endless explanations. Those who genuinely wish to know the truth will observe your life. Those determined to misunderstand you would not be convinced even if you spoke for hours. As you become more grounded, something else begins to unfold. The manipulator grows restless. The guilt no longer works. The emotional traps no longer capture your attention. The arguments fail to produce the reaction they once did. They may become louder for a while, testing whether the old version of you still exists. But if you remain steady, they eventually face a reality they cannot control. They are standing before someone whose peace is no longer available for negotiation, and that is when manipulation begins to lose its power. When manipulation begins to lose its power, you may feel an urge to announce your transformation. You may want to tell the other person that things are different now, that you have finally seen through their behavior, that from this day forward you will no longer tolerate disrespect. While that desire is understandable, it often creates another unnecessary battle. A person who has benefited from ignoring your boundaries will rarely applaud you for creating them. More often, they will challenge them, question them, or attempt to negotiate them. This is why your actions must become stronger than your words. A boundary is not a speech. It is not a threat. It is not a long explanation designed to gain someone's approval. A boundary is a quiet decision about what you will and will not participate in. It is a commitment you make with yourself long before anyone else notices it. Many people believe they have boundaries because they constantly talk about them. They say, "You need to respect me." They say, "You cannot keep treating me this way." They repeat these statements over and over, hoping that one day the other person will finally understand. But words without consistent action slowly lose their meaning. If every boundary can be argued away, delayed, or ignored without consequence, then it is no longer a boundary. It becomes a request. There is great wisdom in saying less and living more. Instead of announcing every change, simply begin making different choices. If a conversation becomes disrespectful, you end it. If someone repeatedly invades your peace, you reduce your availability. If your kindness is continually mistaken for permission to mistreat you, you stop offering unlimited access to your time and energy. There is no need for anger. There is no need for revenge. Quiet consistency speaks a language that cannot be misunderstood. Notice how nature teaches this lesson. A mountain does not explain why it cannot be moved. The ocean does not apologize for its tides. A tree does not ask permission before growing toward the light. Everything in nature honors its own design without seeking approval. Human beings often forget this. We spend so much of our lives asking for permission to protect our peace, as though our well-being must first be accepted by everyone around us. The truth is that healthy people do not fear boundaries. They appreciate them because they understand that mutual respect creates trust. It is usually those who benefited from your lack of boundaries who become upset when you finally establish them. Their discomfort is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. Often it is evidence that the old pattern is coming to an end. This requires patience because people will test your consistency. Someone may ignore your limits just to see if you still mean what you say. They may accuse you of changing, becoming distant, becoming selfish, or no longer caring. Do not let these words shake you. Every meaningful change in life feels uncomfortable to those who were comfortable with the old version of you. Remember that protecting your peace does not require you to become harsh. Firmness and kindness can exist together. You can speak gently while standing firmly. You can wish someone well without allowing them unlimited access to your life. Compassion does not require self-sacrifice. Love does not require the abandonment of self-respect. As you continue honoring your boundaries without anger or pride, something beautiful begins to happen. The people who genuinely value you draw closer because they recognize your sincerity. The people who only valued your availability begin to drift away because the relationship no longer serves their expectations. You do not have to push them. You do not have to convince them to leave. Your consistency quietly reveals every person's true intention, and truth always finds those who have the courage to live it. Once your boundaries become a way of life rather than a temporary reaction, your attention naturally begins to shift. For a long time, your energy may have been consumed by one question: how do I deal with this person? Every day revolved around anticipating their mood, recovering from their words, or preparing for the next conflict. Even when they were not physically present, they occupied your thoughts. In many ways, they were still directing your life without your permission. This is one of the greatest victories a toxic relationship can achieve. Not controlling your body, but controlling your focus. Wherever your attention goes, your life follows. If your thoughts are constantly occupied by resentment, frustration, or the desire to prove yourself, then your own growth quietly comes to a standstill. You may have escaped the argument, yet you remain imprisoned by it. There comes a point where healing is no longer about creating distance from another person. It becomes about creating closeness with yourself. This is the moment when your life begins to expand again. Instead of waking each morning wondering what they might do next, you begin asking yourself a different question. Who am I becoming today? That question changes everything. A meaningful life cannot be built upon avoidance alone. It is not enough to simply remove what harms you. You must also cultivate what strengthens you. An empty garden does not stay empty for long. If you do not intentionally plant seeds of wisdom, discipline, gratitude, and purpose, the weeds of fear and old habits will eventually return. This is why daily practice matters so much. Whether it is meditation, exercise, reading, prayer, learning a new skill, or simply spending quiet moments reflecting on your life, each small act is a declaration that your future deserves more attention than your past. These habits may seem ordinary, but over time they reshape your identity. They remind you that your worth is measured not by how well you survive chaos, but by how consistently you create peace. Purpose is a powerful form of protection. A person who has direction cannot be easily distracted. When your mind is invested in meaningful work, your body is cared for, your spirit is nourished, and your heart is guided by values rather than impulses, there is less room for unnecessary drama to take root. You stop searching for emotional battles because your energy has found a higher purpose. Notice how people change when they are deeply committed to something meaningful. They walk differently. They speak with greater clarity. They no longer feel compelled to explain every decision because they know where they are going. Their confidence is not loud, but it is unmistakable. It comes from living in alignment with what truly matters. This is also when toxic people often become confused. They may attempt to regain your attention through criticism, unexpected kindness, guilt, or even manufactured crises. They sense that your focus has shifted away from them, and without realizing it, they begin reaching for the control they once had. But if your life is anchored in purpose instead of reaction, those attempts lose their power. You recognize them for what they are, distractions from the path you have chosen. Do not underestimate the quiet strength of a fulfilled life. Happiness that depends on someone else's behavior is fragile. Peace that is rooted in your own discipline is enduring. The more deeply you invest in becoming wiser, healthier, calmer, and more compassionate, the less emotional space remains for those who thrive on conflict. They are no longer competing with your attention because your attention has already been given to something far more valuable. And when your life no longer revolves around them, their influence begins to disappear on its own. When your attention is no longer captured by conflict, something subtle begins to unfold. You stop feeling the need to force outcomes. You no longer wake up wondering how to make someone understand what they have done, how to make them regret their actions, or how to finally remove them from your life. Instead, you begin trusting a quieter process, one that does not rely on pressure, anger, or control. This is where patience becomes one of your greatest strengths. Many people believe they must push toxic people away with dramatic confrontations. They imagine that one powerful speech will change everything. They rehearse every sentence in their minds, hoping that if they can just find the perfect words, the other person will suddenly recognize the damage they have caused. But life rarely unfolds this way. Someone who has spent years avoiding responsibility is unlikely to accept it because of one conversation. In fact, confrontation often gives them exactly what they were hoping for: another opportunity to argue, deny, blame, or manipulate. There is a deeper wisdom in allowing people to reveal themselves through their own behavior. You do not need to expose someone who refuses to hide. If you remain calm, observant, and consistent, patterns become impossible to ignore. What once seemed confusing begins to make perfect sense. You notice that every apology is followed by the same action. Every promise fades when it is no longer convenient. Every moment of kindness appears only when they fear losing influence. The cycle repeats so often that you no longer need proof. Reality becomes clear without forcing it. One of the hardest lessons to accept is that not every battle deserves your participation. The ego often mistakes action for strength. It whispers that if you do not confront every lie, you are weak. If you do not answer every accusation, you have lost. But wisdom understands something different. There are moments when the highest form of strength is refusing to enter an arena that only drains your spirit. This does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming intentional. Instead of chasing people, you let them make their own choices. Instead of trying to fix every broken relationship, you allow others to carry responsibility for their own actions. You stop rescuing those who repeatedly reject accountability. This is not cruelty. It is respect for yourself and for the natural consequences that every person must eventually face. Have you ever noticed that people who depend on manipulation rarely stay where it no longer works? They seek environments where their habits are rewarded. When they can no longer create guilt, provoke emotional reactions, or control your decisions, they often become restless. They may search for another audience, another conflict, another person willing to carry the emotional weight they can no longer place upon you. You did not force them to leave. You simply stopped providing the conditions that allowed the unhealthy pattern to survive. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. Anyone can remain calm for one day. Anyone can establish a boundary during a moment of inspiration. The real transformation happens when you continue choosing peace long after the emotions have settled. Day after day, conversation after conversation, you remain the same. You do not return to old habits because someone presses the familiar buttons. You do not abandon your values because another person becomes uncomfortable. Your steadiness becomes your greatest message. Over time, something remarkable happens. The relationship changes without you trying to control it. Some people adapt because they genuinely value mutual respect. Others slowly drift away because they realize they can no longer shape your decisions through fear, guilt, or confusion. In either case, you no longer need to chase a specific outcome. You trust that truth, when given enough time, always uncovers what deception tries to hide. And those who cannot control your peace eventually choose to walk away from it. When someone who once disturbed your peace no longer has the power to influence your heart, you realize that the greatest transformation was never about them. It was always about you. The person you were trying to escape became the very reason you discovered a strength you did not know you possessed. What once felt like a burden became a teacher. Not because suffering is something to seek, but because every challenge carries an invitation to awaken. Many people spent years measuring victory by external outcomes. They believe they have won only if the toxic person apologizes, admits they were wrong, or experiences the same pain they once caused. They wait for justice to arrive in a form they can see. But if your peace depends on another person's transformation, then your freedom is still attached to them. You are still waiting. You are still hoping. You are still allowing their choices to determine your emotional state. True freedom begins when you no longer need that ending. Imagine carrying a heavy stone every day. At first, you blame the weight of the stone. You complain about how unfair it is that you were given such a burden. But one day, you simply place it on the ground and continue walking. The world did not become lighter lighter because the stone changed. It became lighter because you stopped carrying what was never yours to hold. This is how resentment works. It convinces you that holding on protects you from future pain. In reality, it keeps you connected to the very experience you wish to leave behind. Forgiveness, in its deepest sense, is not declaring that harmful behavior was acceptable. It is refusing to let yesterday continue stealing today's peace. It is choosing not to build your future around an old wound. There is another misunderstanding that often appears on this path. People confuse peace with weakness. They assume that if you remain calm, you have forgotten what happened. If you show compassion, they think you have lowered your standards. But genuine peace is not forgetfulness, it is clarity.